Good evening. What you will hear tonight is something very special, something unique. Anton Bruckner was one of the greatest symphonists that ever lived. Some people even think he was the greatest. What made him so great? Well, he wrote 9 symphonies, but that's not so much compared to Joseph Haydn, who wrote 104. Mozart wrote 41 symphonies, and Bruckner only 9. But also Beethoven wrote 9 symphonies. 9 seems to be a sort of enchanted number for symphonists. Mahler also wrote 9 symphonies. Many other people who wanted to reach this number tried to reach 9 but didn't make it. 9 is a magic number. Bruckner did not even could not finish his 9th symphony. He died before he could finish the last movement. So the 8th symphony that we are playing tonight is his last completed symphony, and he considered it his greatest symphony. And it is remarkable that this symphony that he considered his greatest did cause him so much pain. He worked on it for a long time, and when it was finished, he sent the score to a conductor that he knew very well and who he admired very much, Hermann Levy, who had played wonderful performances of his 7th symphony. So he would think that now his very greatest achievement would land into the right hands when it came to Hermann Levy. But Hermann Levy could not understand the music. He didn't reply. For a long time he was silent, and he didn't know what to do with the symphony. He didn't understand it. It was so remarkable, so new, so different. The 7th symphony that he had performed so nicely started with a wonderful melody. Wonderful melody. But this symphony starts with no melody at all. It starts with a what is that? Hermann Levy didn't know what to do with it. That's no melody. So he sent the symphony back and let a friend tell Bruckner, I don't know what to do with it, so I cannot perform it. And Bruckner was, of course, devastated. It caused him a nervous breakdown. But what he did 3 years later, he was ready to present a revised version. He had changed something in the first movement. Instead of a big, grandiose finale in C major, he had made a soft ending, stopping in some resignation. This was a great improvement, I must say, because the last movement, after almost 1 hour and a half, ends with this triumphant big C major. It goes almost for a whole minute. You hear this chord with lots of lively melodies competing for the sound. So the first movement cannot be like that. It must be something different. The first movement ends tiridum, 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 dying away. Otherwise, the first movement is a grandiose movement, and this ta-doom is just the start of a wonderful development melody. But there's lots of intermissions between, just a few notes, and then it is a pause, a few notes and a pause. And the second theme is a great contrast to that. Very melodious. Very, very different. And these 2 melodies and the third melody then are worked out, and this contrast and we combine in very different modes. It's fascinating to follow. And it ends in this resignation. Regularly, the second movement of a symphony is a slow movement. But the first movement of this symphony is so broad. It's not really slow, but it's so broad and so solemn that he felt you cannot have a slow movement of that, but something lively. So he put the scherzo, which is the really usually the third movement, he put in the second place. That's a big contrast. Very simple in a way. He called this theme well, difficult to translate, but in Germany, you know, they have a symbol of a very simple peasant, der deutsche Michel. And there's a long story about how he came to be mentioned, be called Michel. But he was sort of the prototype of a very simple but happy man. And this theme is very simple. And it comes back in some different instruments, comes in the horns, worked on this simple melody. And where you will remark when it comes in the deep instrument, the double basses, and also in the tuba, so to reconfirm that we know. It's a wonderful contrast to this almost philosophical music that is surrounded around this movement. Then in the scherzo there's a trio, which is something new he wrote for this second version. And it's a beautiful song, mostly for the strings. And the accompaniment is very simple, by plucked strings, plum, 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 very, very simple. But of course developed in a beautiful fashion. And very surprisingly, at the end of the first section, you heard 3 harps. Bruckner and harp, that does not really go well together, you think. He never used harps before. But here you use harp, not only 1 harp, he says, if possible, I want 3 harps. And that is, of course, what we used. 3 harps because, of course, harp is not a very strong instrument. It's a very soft, very beautiful instrument. You cannot play very loud on a harp. Well, if you come close and you have a microphone, of course you can make lots of sound with it. But if you had an orchestra of 100 or more people, the harps are difficult to project. So he wanted it more harps just to have it project well. But I suspect there's another reason. 3 is a holy number for Bruckner. Bruckner was a very pious man. He was almost like a monk. He grew up as a singer in the cathedral of St. Florian in Austria. And he was very attached to the Catholic faith. He was a very pious man, very observant. You can call him naive, but he was a very, very clever person. So he was naive only in his relation to God. God for him was something you could not approach, you can only pray to. And the 3, the Trinity is a symbol for Bruckner. He used the 3 number very, very much. So 3 harps is also a symbol of this. Then comes the slow movement. The slow movement is really the crown of this symphony. It's almost 1/2 an hour long. Longer than most Haydn symphonies, most Mozart symphonies. 1 movement. But it's not the length that makes it so fantastic. It's the beauty of the movement and how the movement develops. It starts with a simple D major chord in a sort of vague rhythm. Ti ti pom 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 pa, pa, pa. This is the typical Bruckner rhythm, that, by the way. It's a combination of 2 and 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Sort of give some vagueness, you don't know where you really are, you just are floating around in space. And then comes a melody in the first violin on one note. Ding, 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 ding. So one note crescendo and diminuendo, coming and going. Also in this melody of just a few notes, you have almost eternity, a symbol of eternity. Beginning, climax, and dying away. And the harmonies are changing slowly but impressively. Every bar is a new harmony, every bar is a new revelation, something you don't expect, surprise. It gets more and more beautiful. Then comes the harps with the big chords enlivening the harmonies. And the second theme is something extremely beautiful. It's played by the cello. Bruckner had a special liking for cellos, perhaps like it because it's so like the human voice, his own voice. So moving, expressive note, and then relaxing to a lower note. If you look at it closer, you will discover that that's the reverse of the first interval in the first movement with ta-dee, da-dee, da-dee. So he reverses it. There's always a deep intelligence behind the melodies that he chooses. They are all related. You will notice also that they were ti, tu, tu, the ta-tam, and the first movement started ta-ta, with the same ta-ta, a short note and a long note. Ti-ti. This comes into most beautiful and moving harmonies, grows and then comes also in a soft version, which is for me the most moving, where it comes softer than anything else. And of course, then the growth of it becomes even bigger when it starts so soft. It's also a development, as usual, where the harmony, where the melodies are mixed together in the most remarkable fashion. Sometimes we have even 3 melodies at the same time. And at the end, there's a long coda. We call it coda. That's a sort of a last ending. Coda means tail, the end of the end. And here you hear the horns. He had a special liking for the horns, a very romantic kind of sound. He used the horns even in an earlier symphony. For instance, the 4th symphony is really a horn symphony, where the horns play a signal. Tee, too, too, tee, 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 tee. So the romantic call in the woods. And here the horns play all 3, or sometimes all 4 together, with the same rhythm that you have in the beginning with the violins. Teen, 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 teen. And this is developed about 2-3 minutes, and with sort of a dialogue between the 4 horns and the violins. And then at the end, it dies down, and instead of the horns, you hear the 4 tubas. Those are instruments that are played with horn-like mouthpieces, but have a deeper and even more mellow sound. That was an instrument that he had taken from the Wagner scores. He admired Wagner very much. And this is also because we call these tubas often for Wagner tubas, that Wagner was the first one to use them. But Bruckner also used them here at the end of this movement. Well, he used them all the time, but at the end he used them just for them alone. And it dies down with ti, 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 da, da. Very simple, it's a scale. Ti, 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 da, ti. It's moving. We in the orchestra, we are so moved with this music, we cannot speak after it. I hope it will speak also to you. Then comes the last movement, the ground Philharmoniker. It's almost as long as the slow movements, about 20-25 minutes. It starts with the trum, trum, trum. This short note and the long note, trum, trum. That was the beginning of the first movement. Ta-da, ta-da. And in the slow movement, you remember ti, ta-da, this ta-da. And the scherzo, by the way, starts with the horn call, ta-da, ta-da. So you hear all these short and long, ti-ti, ti-ti, in all 4 movements. And here at the last movement, it's repeated, ti-dim, 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 ti-dim. It's almost like a cavalry riding. Bruckner lived at times where lots of wars. There were difficult times, so he had, this cavalry in his mind. He heard them when they trained outside Vienna, and that might be inspiring to him for this rhythm. But then comes a melody in the brass. Tidim, 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 tadom, tadom, tadim, badadadi, dadadada, like fanfares. Very, very festive music. And you'll notice titi, titi, short note, long note, short note, long note. This is developed in wonderful and ever surprising harmonies. And then comes a second melody, very different, very melodious, long notes. Ti, 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 tu, tu, tu. For those who are listening much to music, perhaps you will recognize this theme. In another rhythm, it's a theme that Mozart used. And here in the Bruckner, this is developed in wonderful harmonies also, mostly for the strings. When it comes to the third theme, this fashion. And combining with these 3 melodies, he builds an enormous movement. It's very fascinating to listen to it. And if you remember this, you can hear it in many, many places in different instruments. Often in the brass, often in the strings also, often in canon, between second violin and first violin, second violin and viola. Tu-du, tu-du, tu-du. You hear it all everywhere. And then comes the end of the end. A coda again, the end of the end. And it starts very solemn. It says in the score, ruhig, which means tranquillo, very calm. And the tempo is very, very calm. And you hear these melodies that you heard at the cavalry, now very solemn and very soft. Ever surprising new harmonies. Myself, I get association of nature when I hear this. You look here, most wonderful sight, and you look there, most wonderful sight. Mountains, wonderful pastures, an enormous experience to watch this and see, and you get grateful that you are able to live in such a beautiful surrounding. So it's also when you hear this music. And of course it builds up to a terrific climax at the end. And you hear pieces of all four movements at the same time. In the basses we hear ta-dam, ta-din, ta-din, ta-da-dam, ta-din, ta-din, ta-da-dam, which is from the first movement. Now in the major, not in the minor, but in the major. And you hear in the trumpets and the flutes, you hear the second movement, lam, pom, pom, pim, pom, 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 pom. A little bit for tim, 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 pom. Little variation. And in the third movement you hear the horn. Tim, 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 ta-dum. Tim, tam, pom, pa-dum. And in the last movement you hear also in the brass. Tim, tidim, tim, tidim. This is the most exciting way of ending a symphony, to pull together everything that was happening for almost 1 hour and a half. You hear all these melodies at the same time. For the most listener, you will not hear all these four themes at the same time. It's difficult. You have to have a little bit analytical mind and remember these themes very well. But you certainly will hear the theme in the cellos and basses and the trombone. Tadim, tadim, taradum, tadim, tadim, taradum. Easy to hear, and you must be able to hear also the trumpet and lan, tin, tan, tan, tam, tin, tan, 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 tam, ti, taratatam, pam. Easy to hear. And it ends with lim, ta, ta, tam. That was the same three notes that was at the end of the first movement, first theme. Ti, da, da, dum. So why I mentioned this is to convey the idea of an enormous imagination. That still is not, making new things all the time, but builds on material that is very simple. It's like building a cathedral, especially the cathedrals in the Baltic Gothic. We have these small red bricks. Can build an enormous cathedral with small, small stones. The stones are equal, but the way you put them together makes an enormous edifice. Bruckner could work with small, simple material and make something great. Now, only God can make something from nothing. That's a sort of definition of God. Only God can make something out of nothing. But a great composer and a great artist, a great painter, a great writer, can mind something big out of something simple. And that was what Bruckner wanted to make. His music has a strong sense of mission. It has beautiful moments all along, wonderful melodies, taken per se, they are wonderful. You go from one beautiful moment to another beautiful all the time. But what is most impressive is how one thing develops from what was, and it develops into something new. It's something that is growing. You have a sense we are going into a direction. You are taken by hand and going some places, going to the climax at the end. This is something that he has in common with Beethoven. Apart from Bach, Beethoven, as for the symphonic work, was his great idol. And his musics are in a one way very similar to Beethoven's work. There's an enormous willpower behind this music. You are led from beginning to the end with a strong hand and put there. You are not going just to enjoy certain beautiful moments, and also some very shocking, some very exciting, some very terrifying, some very dreamy, some very pious, some very boisterous, some very rebellious. But they are all part of a scheme that you have to follow him unto the end. It's difficult to convey this music in words, but I invite you to listen carefully. You have to have some patience, not to expect a change every second. It cannot come every second. And there comes a new harmony every 5 seconds even. You have to have some patience, but let yourself be led through this secure hand until you come to the triumphant end, to the end of the end of this symphony. Enjoy.